Welcome back to Hoops Lounge, for the show that's easier to pronounce than Giannis Antetokounmpo. My name is Marc Griffin, aka Montreal Mark. That was not an easy one. I'm joined by Sporting Phil Boileau, and Justin Rowan. Cavs, we're going to talk madness because it's March. Let's start with Ben Simmons, who's the projected #1 pick in the NBA draft this year. Academically ineligible for the John Wooden Awards, not even participating in March Madness tournament. The big issue, I think, if you look at the big picture, is this one-and-done philosophy. The system seems to be broken, if not shattered. Justin, I'll go to you first. What do you do with guys like these superstars like Ben Simmons wanting to go to the NBA?
I think people need to get creative when they're coming up with solutions. I don't think any of the models in the past have been the best way to go about it. I think what's really important for the NBA and Adam Silver is to expand the D-League, to have a complete minor league system that players could either opt to go into the NBA draft, and if they're not ready, they develop in the D-League. You can call them up, similar to how hockey does it. But then if you commit to college basketball, you have to commit for a certain amount of years. I don't know if you want to make that 2 or 3 years, but I think that would improve the college basketball product because guys that want to get that education are able to get that education. They're able to develop in that way, and once they're done, they can enter into the draft. Or if some of these guys are just ready to play in the NBA, like we look at LeBron James, Dwight Howard, guys that were really ready to go pro right off the bat, they can go into the NBA, they can opt for that route, and if they still need some time to develop or if they need to fine-tune some things, teams can send them down to the D-League. So I think a system like that would be the best way to go about it, but the infrastructure has to be in place before they make that change.
Phil, what's your take?
Honestly, I mean, it's an interesting play, right? Because I think making them go to college, it kind of feels like they're just perpetuating the NCAA money-making machine. It's kind of like, here, come to us for a year so we can make a lot of money off you. I mean, I know I have a bit of a sour look on the NCAA in a lot of ways. When you look at Ben Simmons, obviously academically, he was not going to be one of those guys who sticks around for 2, 3, 4 years to get his degree. I mean, he barely wants to show up to anything, or so he's one of those guys who wants to go to the NBA. I think I agree with most things that Justin's saying, but my counterpoint would be, if you have a guy who goes into the NBA right away from high school, and then you have this other guy who goes 4 years collegiate system, well, obviously we all know that how the salary brackets play out. Once you're off your first 4-year contract, you're eligible for more money, more money, more money. So what you're basically saying, in my eyes, is that some guy who chooses to go to a Duke or a Syracuse or whatever and get his degree, he's going to come out 3, 4 years later with the degree, which is cool. But the reality is the degree is more of a backup plan, right? I mean, if they're sticking around the league for 10 years, the money they make off their degree afterwards, I mean, like, it's great that Pau Gasol is a surgeon or a doctor, but I mean, like, he's making way more money with the Bulls. But at the same point, you have to kind of reward the guys who choose to go to university and say, maybe we'll bump up that pay scale if you choose to do that, because guys just for the money will come in out of high school, be like, hey, I want to get my rookie contract done as soon as I can to start making that first real contract, then the second one, and turn into the Kobe world. I mean, look how much money Kobe Bryant's making because he got in at 17, right? Mm-hmm. And if he had come in, at 22, he would be pushed back. Like, he wouldn't be making $25 million at this point. I mean, that's all salary cap dependent and where that goes up and down. But I think to do that, I think it would go hand in hand with the NBA saying, okay, we want to promote our players being more intelligent, educated, work through those systems, but at the same point, we want to reward a guy like a Tim Duncan who spends a few years monetarily in the NBA by saying, your bracket now gets pushed a bit by maybe years of service or a degree. Like, maybe if you graduate, and it may be a little dicey how they push degrees like they did for Shaquille O'Neal, but I still think that matters. And
yeah, my thing with that is, like, if you're going to college, like, I think that's a decision players and people are able to make for themselves. And if you're going to college, if you're going that route, it's because you don't feel you're ready for the NBA. So you're developing that skill set. And maybe because of that development at that level, you get drafted higher and you make more money. Like, look at Russell Westbrook. He spent 2 years in college. He was drafted by Seattle. And it took him 2-3 years in the NBA before he latched on. If he came straight out of high school, those 4 years of being raw and not a very good player might see him out of the league. He would have been drafted lower, so he's not making as much on his rookie contract. And he sure isn't getting the max after that rookie deal because he didn't latch on and he didn't have that solid footing to eventually build off of. So I think it'd be, obviously, like, I get where you're coming from, but I think that's a decision players are able to make, and they have to evaluate where they're at with their skill set. Damian Lillard, another good example, someone that needed that college experience for a couple of years before he could make that leap to the NBA. CJ McCollum as well.
But if they know they can spend the time in the D-League and that still counts towards their NBA contract, isn't that the same thing? Just why go to university?
Well, here's something we have to bring up is the injury issue, right? There's always that what if. Like, what if I break my leg or whatever while I'm in college? Phil, do you think there should be some kind of insurance policy in place, especially for the bigger name players?
I mean, like right away when you say that, I mean, I was thinking, way back in the Yao Ming draft to Jay Williams. I mean, obviously he didn't get hurt playing. It was a motorcycle accident, but like I think it's going to happen that players are able to take career insurances out. I don't think that's a strange thing at all, especially the higher picks. But I mean, those injuries can happen wherever you are in the D-League or in college. I just think if I'm a player and I think I'm good at all, I don't see the reason at all why I would ever go to college and spend time there, not be paid, and have to deal with presumably worse competition than go to a D-League, even if I'm not ready, be paid way more money, get chance to be called up, play against way better competition, and presumably have better systems. And I think that growth would happen more. I mean, in the collegiate system, it's a lot based on coaches' styles. Are you being put into the Princeton system or this system? Whereas in the D-League, I mean, outside of Sacramento's D-League, you're playing legit NBA-style basketball. I don't you go back to university after with all that money. I don't see why any player would go to university instead of going to the D-League if that was the choice.
Well, I think it would be an option for those that aren't 100% sure if they're going to make it in the NBA. Like, let's say Draymond Green, for example, who had to spend the 4 years under Tom Izzo, and you'd be going for kind of a way to hedge, because you get the degree, you'd have that plan B, because really when you think of how many players are in the collegiate system, how many great athletes, guys that were the best player on their team growing up or their AAU team, that don't make it into the NBA. It gives you that plan B. You get to go with these all-world coaches, Tom Izzo, Krzyzewski.
If you're not guaranteed maybe a first-round draft. I get that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it wouldn't be for those guys that are bona fide, first-round talent.
Okay.
And so we mentioned Plan A and Plan B, but there's also a Plan C. There's guys like Emmanuel Mudiay who went over to China to play. Phil, do you recommend something like that?
Emmanuel Mudiay, Brandon Jennings. I'm going to say no, because as well as they did, when we looked at the draft last year, a lot of criticisms were made on Mudiay that it wasn't real NBA competition. I don't think playing in a league that doesn't resemble the NBA benefits you more than I think in a lot of ways the collegiate system represents better than a lot of these international leagues. I mean, sure, you may make a little bit more money, but a lot of times they're just supremely the best player on weak competition. Like sometimes it's not the case. I totally get that. I'm not trying to say the other leagues are terrible or anything, but for me, if I'm coming out of the draft, I want to showcase my talents, and if I'm not doing that against legit NBA competition, I don't know why I'm doing that. So I guess I just don't really see it. I think people did that because the D-League idea that you guys are referring to didn't exist. I think if the D-League did exist, I think going overseas, look, if you don't get drafted in the first 3 years, then go. Why go before, right? So I don't know. I think it would replace the overseas brain drain there.
Justin,
and the other thing is, I was just going to add, just quickly add that there's a human element to that too. If you're 17, 18 years old, you're playing in a strange country, you've never been there, you don't have family there, presumably you're making money. I mean, I don't think that's a choice that's built for every personality.
Yeah, and Phil, I mean, I'll throw the last question to you. Do you think kind of what the Raptors are doing, having their D-League team basically in their own city, having Bruno Caboclo there, nourishing him, developing him, close to home, do you think that's the ideal model to have?
Well, look, to preface this, I'm going to have to take my Bruno homerism and put it on the side. But I think it makes sense. I think the idea that you can spend time with the big team, that you can, the way Justin prefaced it before, comparing it to the NHL is perfect. I mean, being here in Montreal, I see this happening with the Montreal Canadiens all the time, and it works. You get guys who come up for 2 games, go down. They get amazing experience. They get to train with real players. I think guys like Bruno needed a situation like that. I think throwing him into the NBA right away, as much as I would have liked to see him, I think would have been setting him up for failure. And I don't know. I just think it's a perfect situation. I think every team should have their own D-League team that works exactly kind of like how Justin described it starting off the show. And I think you could really monetize that as the NBA. You could use that as a training ground. You could sell tickets. You could these are more ways to market your sport. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Mm-hmm.